Hey guys, welcome to our show. We've decided to put this together to be able to introduce some topics and have a chat. We often are sitting around the office and we'll be talking about different trends in the communications and telecoms industry. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to be able to put together our content so you guys can all hear about what we think on those topics. We've had a few people want to be potentially guests on the show, so we thought, you know what, for our first ever pilot episode, we'd pull this together on a shoestring budget, see how we go. We set up a mock studio and thought we'd kick off straight away with some of this content material that we wanted to put out. My name's Dan Pearson. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called PingCo, focused mostly on the cloud space, specifically in the telco and comms world. Very heavily aligned with Microsoft on the voice play, but we've built some really cool technology that we're showcasing to the industry. With me on the show, I've got Jeff Coleman and Erhan Boduk, who are also here with me today. So, guys, do you want to introduce yourselves to our future audience?
Sure.
And tell about yourself.
My name's Jeff. I've been in the industry obviously a long time. I've sold contact center and PABX technology. I was there for the first transition of PABX to IP telephony and all the battles that took place then. And then from IP telephony to the cloud, and now we're in a new space really. And I think the old world is starting to decline and we've got to look at what's coming next.
Awesome. I thought you were going to say you're there for the very first phone call that ever took place.
I think the very first phone call was possibly about me, but there you go.
All good. And Erhan?
Yeah, hi, it's Erhan here. So also a relatively new starter here at PingCo. I've been in the industry for about 20 years myself. Spent the last 8 years at Optus and also had a brief stint at NTT. Before that, long history in managed service providers, tech startups. So really excited to be here today, and hoping we can impart some knowledge.
Awesome.
Great.
Very good. Well, look, we are really excited to be able to put this content together, and we are looking for more topics and ideas, so feel free to mention anything that you'd like us to potentially have a chat about. If you want to become a presenter on the show with us, by all means, ping us a message and we'll give you some contact details for that, and we'll more than happily have you as part of our journey. Some of the things that I really wanted to sort of cover off and talk about in our first ever episode is a little bit about what we see the trends in this sort of industry being. And, between us, the three of us, we've got a collective experience of 50, 60 years in the telco space. So I think, I wouldn't say we're the experts to talk about these topics, but I'd love to be able to share our opinions with others and really just sort of see where we go, basically. So one of the topics I wanted to throw to you guys to have a bit of a chat about, first of all, was this concept that we hear around the death of the telephone number, or the dying of phone numbers across the globe. A bit of history: the phone numbers have been around since 1876, the very first time a phone number was used. And it's really hard to believe that we're still here in 2022 with phone numbers playing such a pivotal role in the technology space. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on that entire evolution of the phone number and perhaps where we see it going into the future.
Sure thing. So I think telephones numbers have been around for a long time because the technology or the use case hasn't really changed. It doesn't matter what's in the middle, it's still a number of people talking together, two people or a bunch of people talking on a single conversation. But I think the death of the phone number will come as the use case becomes more rich. When it becomes more about content, becomes more about AI, becomes more about video, then by definition a phone number is limiting you really to a voice conversation. And as we migrate away from voice, we're looking at all of these mixed media streams. I think the identity people use to be able to access you for a phone call will change, and whether that's an email address or a SIP number or some other label, there'll be a change in the way that people access and identify us.
It's really interesting you say that the other way people identify. Like, I know myself, I've got 9 different messaging platforms on my phone. LinkedIn announced not so long ago that they're doing video calls through their platform. So all these sorts of new trends I'd say they are slowly doing away with the phone number, but the industry is still growing 14% year on year. we're still consuming more and more numbers. Those numbers aren't being given up. So
I think you touched on an important point. You've got 7 different messaging platforms, and I think this is where you need some of that orchestration occurring, where you need a common platform to be able to stitch all those other disparate platforms together. Because if I was to call a particular business and they were on one particular platform, you've got no way of actually getting through unless you are also subscribed to that platform. So I think there's certainly an opportunity there to have an orchestration platform to be able to stitch all those other disparate telephony platforms together. Also, when you look at, the use case of that traditional number, I remember 15, 20 years ago when you wanted to call someone overseas, you would call their landline number, right, or their mobile number, pay extortion-like rates. But, when's the last time we actually did that, right? Everyone is using WhatsApp or some other VoIP-based platform. So certainly I think the landscape is changing. We're becoming less reliant on the traditional phone number, but we just still can't get away from it until we solve for some of those other problems.
Yeah, people really want that choice too. Yes, there's this concept idea of a common platform that we might all use one day, but no one drives the same car. We're all driving the thing that we want to drive.
Correct.
We're using the messaging platform that we want to use. So it's interesting that there's a potential concept of a common platform, but that is the telephone number. The telephone number's been the common platform that stitched all these things together over time. And whilst you can make a phone call on WhatsApp or on Messenger or LinkedIn or Teams or whatever it might be, they're still heavily involved in plumbing that lowest common, phone number piece to the puzzle, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally agree. I think the car analogy is a great one because, we've all got our own preferences about what we drive and what it does for us and what it does in the market. But again, the common denominator there is the road network, whether they run on fuel or electricity, but the same mechanism occurs. It gets you from A to B. A conversation is between the A party and the B party, potentially. So there's lots of common analogies, and I think the death of the phone number will either come because we migrate to a new platform, and whether that's email addresses or some other type of identity or technology that is yet to hit the market. But I think Erhan's right, there needs to be a way of orchestrating all of those components together so that everybody can communicate.
And it's a real industry challenge, and until somebody disrupts or creates that piece of technology, we're going to see a continued growth because communication, people across the world now more than ever are relying on those technologies to communicate. We don't have the luxury of these face-to-face calls. We're all 1.5 metres apart.
And we've sort of talked about the voice component of communicating, but I think there's going to be a time, and it's probably overdue, we're going to have to look at what else is, what comes next after voice. I mean, there are already ways of communicating through websites which involve chat and video calls. So when is that going to become more commonplace? And what are vendors doing in that space actively to drive that type of consumption? I don't think we're seeing enough of it. The technology is there, and there are a plethora of use cases that would certainly lift certain industries, to a point where it's doing a much better job serving their end customers as opposed to the humble phone call.
Yeah, no, definitely, and it's really interesting, right? If the consumers need to drive this, and if the technology's there for them to call their bank on WhatsApp, they're probably going to do that before they pick up and make a telephone call. The flip side of that is these organisations need to be able to adapt, and we hear this omni-channel contact centre concepts, right? Where they've got a Twitter feed and a Messenger feed and an Instagram feed, plus we do text, audio, web chat, video. Well, if these organisations are really having to communicate on 15 different platforms, it's not sustainable. It's not, I've tried to talk to you on Signal. Well, okay, sorry, we use WhatsApp. Oh, but I'm not a WhatsApp user.
Yeah.
They'll risk, minimising and alienating their consumer base. So, it's a real tough question, and perhaps maybe it's the organisations that need to lead this transformation.
Well, that's a great point about omnichannel contact centres having a multitude of communications technologies. People want to communicate on the devices and the applications and platforms that they use. But if the overall experience is still poor, that they call in on WhatsApp or they call in on Messenger or they call in on a phone, if they're still waiting for 20 minutes to talk to a person, it doesn't matter what platform they're calling in on.
Yep.
Organisations still need to be able to deliver a quality service. Having different choices of poor experience is still a poor experience.
Yeah, it definitely is. And imagine that. I'm envisaging this video. I'm talking on WhatsApp maybe to my bank, and they start playing me ads of different places I can spend my money, or holiday destinations that I can probably get a personal loan for. So I don't want that as a consumer. I don't want to be just driven to an ad platform or being waiting on hold. Ultimately, it's all around self-service. But when we talk in this comms space, we really want to be able to still have that human-to-human interaction, and people like dealing with people.
They do, and people are typically very, very time poor.
Yep.
It's not about talking to an organisation that's going to service their needs eventually, but try and sell them 3 or 4 different concepts at the same time. People want to get through to the person that's going to answer their needs or access the information they need to complete their transaction or allow them to get on with their lives. And I think that's the lesson of most organisations. It's not about servicing the business's needs, it's about servicing your customers' needs. So those are the critical outcomes.
Yeah, no, definitely. So thinking about a little bit of a topic shift, but if the telephone number's not dying, is the fixed line number dying? So we know in the comm space we've got landline numbers and office numbers or national numbers, and then we've got mobile phone numbers, and mobile phone numbers are probably growing at a much higher rate than the national numbers are, even though they are both growing. What do you guys see? Is there a death of the national number before the mobile number, or what are your thoughts there?
I think before we sort of go down that rabbit hole, what is clearly happening is organisations are shifting their telephony platform away from the office, away from their data centre, into a public cloud. So the cloud PABX roadshow is certainly in full swing, and this is, I guess, a continuation of what was happening 10 years ago when customers were moving their Exchange servers from on-prem to Exchange Online, and then shortly thereafter, public cloud exploded, and many organisations started to challenge whether they needed that amount of edge compute and started moving from their servers into IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. Yep. And this is just the next evolution. Right?
I still remember talking to customers, and they're like, "Oh, we have to keep our on-prem Exchange server."
MPLS network and things like that, and a lot of these things have gone away, right? And it's partially due to vendors like Cisco and Microsoft investing in developing their codecs so that voice traffic can smoothly transact over an internet connection as opposed to an MPLS. And because of that, we now are in a situation where businesses are moving to cloud PABX en masse, and it's only been accelerated through the coronavirus. We've got
wouldn't be a
probably
podcast
still 80%
without us mentioning coronavirus already, would it?
Absolutely. So yeah, 80% of the workforce working remotely. You don't want your traffic to be necessarily tromboning through your own office premise or your data center.
Yep.
You want your end users to use an internet connection, and cloud PABX allows for that. Precisely.
I imagine there's some on-premise phone systems that the dust has settled on the handset. Again, I'm a visual guy, right? So picturing what's back in your office, you haven't been there for 2 years. There's this handset. It's probably breaking apart because it hasn't been touched for a while. That's the reality, right? They've had to go and adapt and put call forwards in place or trombone the calls, like you've said.
It's expensive, it's clunky, it's not a unified experience. Users want to have one app that rules them all, right? And Microsoft is doing a very good job with their Teams application.
Yep.
That's, I guess, the dream, that it's the front door for everything you do.
Yep.
And by adding the telephony feature into Teams, I think they go a long way in achieving that.
No, definitely, 100%. So back to the the telephone number, then are you sort of thinking organisations will just get rid of their fixed line phone numbers?
Well, I think the amount of outbound calls that are being made through that fixed voice is probably minimal, but obviously other customers still do need to reach them using their fixed voice number.
Yep.
I think once that aspect also starts to diminish,
Yep.
that's when the question will be asked, well, do I really need a fixed voice number?
Yeah, I mean, look, my number, on my Teams channel is still a national-based number, right? But I'm mobile most of the time. So, do I need my telephone number anymore?
Well, I mean, that's when the fixed mobile convergence piece comes into it, whereby do you replace your fixed number with a mobile number, which then is plumbed directly into your application of choice.
That's a great point. I think your initial question is interesting. Will the fixed line number die?
Which one will go first?
Yeah, well, I don't think they will. I think the distinction between a fixed line number and a mobile number is an artificial one. It's so that carriers can grade and charge differently for those calls. I think the most likely occurrence is that all the numbers will go into a melting pot again, and you can port any number onto any service. You'll be able to port a mobile number onto a fixed line. There should be no reason why you couldn't do that.
Yep.
And conversely, you could put a fixed line onto a mobile. You can do that using fixed mobile convergence, and there's some great use cases there. And equally, you can use a mobile number on Teams, for instance,
Yep.
so that you're creating a single ubiquitous experience for a user, whether they're on their mobile phone or on their desktop. Shouldn't matter what the number is, but the number should be the identity that people use to contact you.
So you're saying do away with your office number, and when I ring your mobile number, that just rings on Teams and my mobile?
Every device that you need to be connected on.
Right.
Absolutely.
That becomes the primary key effectively. So whether it's a mobile number or whether it's a fixed voice number, it's a number, regardless. So yeah, absolutely. I think
That puts a lot of pressure on these 5G networks and networks of the future, doesn't it?
yeah, and that's where I guess all the investment is going in.
Yep.
You ask any telco, their strategy is 5G. Pour everything that's coming in revenue-wise back into 5G. And I suppose when you look at how do they go to market with 5G, telcos need to look at solving the automation puzzle. I think telcos haven't traditionally done quite well with automating their processes.
Yep.
It's usually a combination of a number of archaic systems that are stitched together and possibly not in a very good way. And so for them to be able to bring out these new next-gen services like 5G, I think they need to consider what their application landscape looks like so they can actually bring to market in an aggressive fashion when things do change. They're ready to be able to bring that new service into the marketplace.
So the data is becoming the new carriage for voice, which we know has been there with SIP for a while, but we're now seeing that because the voice is now moving from a SIP call or a digital ISDN call or whatever it came from, it's now moving into an application-based call, isn't it? So these applications are becoming the voice-aware piece, and that's sitting on that data network layer. So a 5G network isn't so much about the voice part of the network, it's clearly about the data part of the network.
And if you look at the growth of mobile networks in emerging economies, they typically don't have the legacy fixed line infrastructure that's very high quality for deploying ubiquitous phone calls to a landline service everywhere. So it makes much more sense for those economies to invest in mobile technology, 4G, 5G, and whatever comes next. So I think it's incumbent on people in the technology realm, the people that develop these applications, to align them more strongly with a mobile first approach, because mobile is where all the growth is, it's where all the revenue is, and it's the ability to be able to greatly differentiate your services. And I think that's a critical thing for both emerging and evolved economies.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really good point. And I guess for our audience, listening at home or wherever you are in the world on your 5G network, more than likely, we really want to be able to share some of these thoughts and opinions with you, and even have you guys sort of give us some thoughts about where you think this is heading. So keep that in mind as you're listening to some of the content we're talking about. I'll tell you now, this is all unscripted. This is just literally the sorts of conversations that we'll have in our office on a regular basis, the long debates. It's either about how to make a coffee from Erhan or what car I should be driving from Jeff, but then also this telco industry and space. So picking up on what you said before, Jeff, around this legacy infrastructure that telcos were building off and the copper in the ground, the fibre in the ground, fixed mobile networks, etc. If we were going to be building a new telco from day dot, and a lot of these telco big mobile platforms are doing that, they're rolling out brand new networks across the globe, what would they do differently? What would a telco of the future look like, assuming we have a clean slate and nothing legacy?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think that the telco of the future is going to be slightly more split up than the telcos have been over the last 20 years. Deregulation almost needs to happen to a greater degree. I think the likely separation of the delivery mechanism is going to be via low Earth orbit satellites. You get ubiquitous coverage and you've got all of these services that people can subscribe to, be it voice, be it video, be it data, via email, applications, whatever it is, they can all be serviced via a low-cost terrestrial network, and you can get the coverage anywhere. And that takes away the reliance on any particular carrier to have greater coverage in a certain area and then being tied to their office. I think the telco of the future is greater reliance on quality products, quality applications, less so on the coverage and the speed.
So delivering that value prop, and it's funny you say that. I've got a Starlink beta trial at on a property that I've got. There's no coverage yet there. There's no mobile network. There's no fibre, but I'm getting 100 megasecond internet access at sub 100 milliseconds. It's unbelievable having those sorts of access to technology, and that's global. If you can get a GPS signal, you can connect at 100 megasecond and chat to your colleagues across the globe. So
it makes you think why your internet cuts out while you're on the train in a tunnel going from city back home, right?
Yep.
I mean, I was in the office a couple of times last week, and every single time on the train from town hall back home, continual cutouts,
Yep.
right? And it just makes you think, well, surely there is a better way, right? Surely something is wrong. If I'm still unable to make a call, unable to browse the internet
Yep.
while I'm on the train,
the
surely
mobile
there's a better
network's
way.
not necessarily the answer, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
In a tunnel, you're not going to see satellite coverage, but they can have repeaters to
We
solve
put a man
that.
on the moon, Dan, so I'm sure we can sort that out.
Did we put a man on the moon? Allegedly. So no, look, it's a good point, Jeff. And so if these networks are built globally, we're saying, so whether it's the Teslas of the world or the Starlinks of the world building these big global networks that we all piggyback off onto, telcos, are they dying with phone numbers? They've obviously got to evolve and shift and change, but so what does that mean for the telcos?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I think that's probably been asked in a lot of boardrooms in a lot of countries. What does it look like to be a telco in another 10 or 20 years when there is less reliance on terrestrial networks and it's more about the service and the application layer? How do you start to bundle together desirable services so that people will still continue to spend with you? How do you keep that ARPU current and growing with less reliance on infrastructure? There's a position to say that that's a value prop which holds much greater margin retention for carriers, because it's less about the network infrastructure that they can deploy, and it's more about the quality of service and the quality of customer experience. And I'm pretty sure something I hold common with virtually everybody that's watching. I'll spend my money where I get treated well.
Where you've got that true value, that true value delivering exactly what it is that you're after.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And does that potentially mean that telcos start going on a bit of an acquisition strategy to buy out these small, nimble organisations that do provide that layer of, I guess, reporting, AI, machine learning, whatever it is to uplift, I guess, the customer experience?
Well, they're doing that now, right? Telcos are building service arms. They're buying and acquiring managed IT providers and IT companies. We only have to look even locally here on the Gold Coast. There's companies being acquired by telcos to deliver them that managed service capability or that value play that they can go back to their customers. But that's still only version one of this, right? if we're still needing to manage networks and manage infrastructure and deliver services, as Jeff's point, it's add-on services. So maybe the telcos are delivering Netflix bundles and those sorts of services, which they are doing. Maybe they're selling us health insurance. Maybe they're selling us a whole range of services and technology, perhaps, that we're using in our day-to-day lives. And that's that shift that they're having to go through, where they're acquiring the customer because of a product or a value that they're positioning.
And I suppose because some of these, or most of these telcos do have a deep ingrained culture of doing things the traditional way, those small, nimble organisations don't end up thriving, unfortunately, in those telcos. And I've personally experienced that myself. And we don't have to look too far to look at other examples where other telcos have tried to buy certain IP, acquire, leverage some of that skill, and
assimilate to our ways. And
absolutely. And I think you can buy the technology, but if the culture does not change, then that'll largely go to waste. And I think telcos need to, I suppose, look at that a lot more closely. Look at their application stack. Look at the way their operations run. How can they learn from those small and nimble providers, as opposed to merge those providers into their way of thinking?
Yeah, and the telcos can go and potentially acquire IP. They can build IP, and there's another play there where telcos are saying, we're going to build this technology ourselves. And it takes a lot to build technology.
It's
a dangerous thing to say, and all credit to the ones that get it right. And there are good examples of that in the industry, but it's a big, bold move for you to stand up in front of the board and say, we are going to build this technology and pivot our organisation on that.
Yeah, more often than not, they fail, and they fail because they haven't looked at the cultural aspects. They've probably got the technology down pat, but if culturally they cannot move from their current state, then those projects are bound to lag or worse, completely fail.
Yeah, and I guess that everybody wants to be seen as innovative and driving forward those change across the industry, and we're no different in our organisation, obviously. But I guess the big thing here to get right is you've got to have your customer at the forefront of this, and if your customer isn't seeing value, and if you're not making that experience easy, we joke about the fact that we don't need engineers to deploy Netflix. When I signed up for Netflix, I clicked a few buttons and it worked. I didn't have to get a tech team, a pre-sales team, an architecture team. It just worked. And
you don't need a managed services with
don't need a managed service provider.
Do you need me to show you how to flick through the movies?
I just want more content, and the platform that's going to give me more content and more material. So, I've got Stan, I've got Netflix, I've got KO for sports, I've got all of the content providers, but that means that I'm actually driving consumption and spending money, and, that's what telcos want.
Exactly that. And again, it comes down to the content you want. And I think that's part of the challenge for telcos is how do you get the content that has got to be tailored for every individual? Because you either take a scattergun approach and you give them everything, and that's typically expensive and it's cumbersome to navigate to get to the content you want, or you build it into packages where people get more what they want when they want it. But it's interesting your point about build versus buy, because there's a real movement in the market that's changing, where people have been moving away from buying packaged solutions and using things like ACS to develop those personalized experiences for customers. And I think that's a great thing. But there is a huge challenge when you're doing that, because the amount of time it takes to develop those applications, often the market's gone, it's transitioned, it's been consumed, it's moved. And there's a real argument to say that it makes more sense to just target your acquisitions of technology more currently, so that you get the smaller bites of technology that deliver the outcome that you need quickly, rather than trying to build an amorphous delivery mechanism to give everything to everyone. It's going to be a challenge for the telco.
And you might not make your 90 points of margin, but you're making 50, 60 points of margin, addressing a wider audience,
and you're making
go-to-market
quickly.
time.
Absolutely. Yep.
Much quicker. No, definitely. We see that resonating a lot amongst even the people that we talk to on a daily basis, don't we?
For sure.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess, guys, we've really hit 30 minutes. We thought we'd be worried about trying to get content in. We've probably gone even longer than that. But we might wrap up today's episode there, leave you guys with some interesting topics. Make sure you leave some comments around what you think is happening in the industry terms and trends that we've spoken about today. We'll make sure we get some content out regularly across the video podcast. But we're really, really keen and excited to be sharing this with the wider audience. And if you don't mind hearing our opinions and thoughts on the topics, we'll hope to put more content out again soon. And thank you very much for listening. And thank you to both Erhan and Jeff for sharing the
Pleasure.
studio with us.
Good.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Cheers all.